Hi everyone. I'm going to talk about how we analyse social media to help brands be more agile and more authentic in how they communicate in this always-on world that we're living in. So I'll start with the statement. It's not an attention economy that we live in, it's an engagement economy. Even though we're constantly competing for eyeballs and fussing about ad blockers and the impact on advertising and publisher revenue, just because we pay attention to something or it goes in front of our eyes doesn't actually mean anything is getting filtered through our inbuilt ad blockers that we have always had in our brains. Actually, it's engagement that is the critical thing. That is what allows content to impact brand perceptions, and that obviously is what then impacts purchase decision. But when we look at social media analysis and strategy, most brands are still aiming for likes and shares in their social activation. In other words, they're aiming to go viral. So let me make another statement, which might raise some eyebrows. Going viral is not enough. So obviously, the greater your distribution, the more chance content has of engaging more people. So of course, virality plays a role. But it's not enough in and of itself. And the reason why is because of how memory structures work. There are three things advertising needs to do in order to impact long-term memory and therefore future brand decisions. The first thing is it needs to be novel, and that's not some sort of gimmicky novelty. It's just about being different to what the brain had expected, so we get past the inbuilt ad blockers in the brain. The second thing, as everyone in Adland knows, is that emotion is critical, and by connecting with the audience's values, you're much more likely to get into their long-term memory. And the third critical thing is relevance. Those first two things are not enough to impact future brand decision-making if they're completely separated from the decision-making process in the audience's mind. And so relevance at that, in the context of the category and the brand, is really critical. So let's take a look at one of the most viral ads of the past few years. You may remember this spot from last year's Super Bowl. It's Budweiser's Lost Puppy ad. And if you haven't seen it, I've put the link in here that you can have a look at later. But it was a real tearjerker. It was absolutely beautifully shot, and it went viral. It got an unprecedented share of social conversation. It was liked 31 million times and was widely considered to be the winner of the Super Bowl that year. And this year's ads came nowhere close to it. But we didn't agree that it was the winner. We didn't think that it was an effective ad. And we had two pieces of information that we used to come to that conclusion. The first was that in those three ways that I just talked about, it scored very highly on the first two. It was definitely novel, it really tugged at the heartstrings and had emotion, but it didn't have relevance. It scored in the bottom third of ads that we tested in the US in terms of relevance in the category context. The second piece of evidence, though, is what I really want to focus on, and that is the shape of the social conversation. So I said it went viral, but what happened was that when we analysed the pattern of that virality, it was really all one-directional. And what you're looking at on screen is a visualisation of that conversation map, where we had a really big central node where everyone had forwarded on or liked or shared the link to the ad from the central Budweiser account. But there was no conversation. Those nodes on the end didn't link up with each other. They didn't spin off into another conversation. They didn't engage with the ad at all. So it's this shape of conversation that tells us about how well the ad is able to engage with people in social media. So let's look at another example that's a little bit closer to home. What we found was that then those ads were pulled from this year's Super Bowl. So even though they got such great traction, Budweiser didn't use those ads again because, in the words of the Vice President of Marketing for the US, they have zero impact on beer sales. Those ads I won't air again because they don't sell beer. And that is because they lacked relevance, and the relevance led to a lack of engagement. We need to move beyond counting. We need to move beyond likes and shares and start looking at the shape of conversation. What do we mean by the shape of the conversation? Well, a conversation is a series of interactions, and so they can then be visualized into different shapes, or visualized in 2 dimensions, and that shows us different shapes. So the Budweiser account, as we just saw, was the hub and spoke model that was highly centralized. At the other end of the continuum is a completely uncontrolled conversation with lots of people just making random comments and no strong voice from the brand. The ideal pattern for a brand is this ecosystem. That's where the brand has something to say that really engages into a relevant conversation, and people sort of spin off from that, comment on it, and take it in a new direction. And that is really where we see real engagement and therefore real impact on brand memories. So now let's take a look at another campaign, a truly integrated campaign that's a little bit closer to home. This was Bundaberg Rum in Australia. They had a campaign around last year's football finals, both the Aussie Rules and the Rugby League, 2 different codes of footy in Australia. And their campaign was Cheers to a Legend, legend being a word that Australians use to describe a star or an icon. They really worked hard to make this an integrated campaign. They had on-pack activation, where if you took a photo of 2 packs together, you could make a little mashup in an app. They had social search to drive people towards the app. They had TV advertising, and they really tried to drive engagement and respond to culturally relevant conversations where they were legally able to do so. But that was also not a conversation, although for a different reason. It ended up just being a totally disconnected set of conversations, and Bundaberg Rum was really unable to play a strong role in the conversation about the footy finals, or even really in the dark spirits category conversation. This is actually a far more common challenge than what Budweiser faced. Lots of brands would love to have the problem that Budweiser faced. But realistically, often they're in a situation where they have to make the best of content that's not amazing. And so they're really looking to social media to help them amplify and get as much mileage as possible out of that content. But as we all know, it's very difficult to make a brand relevant and something you want to talk about in your social life. So that raises the question, well, why is it so hard? But more importantly, what can brands do about that, and how can we help them? And to answer that question, we need a new lens. We need to stop valuing quantity over quality. In Bundaberg Rum's case, this new lens and this focus on understanding true engagement over number of contacts led to some quite eye-opening conversations for them. So they thought that they'd met their engagement targets because Twitter and Facebook report on engagement metrics. But what that really means is that the video started playing as someone scrolled past it. That's not really engagement. When we had a look at the actual interactions in the category and with the campaign, we saw that totally disconnected map that I showed you a minute ago. So Bundaberg Rum hadn't really been able to extend engagement outside of their core fanatic group, and certainly hadn't connected with the football community. So let's have a look at an example of a brand which has done this really well and see what we can learn from them. And you might think that I should be talking about Red Bull or someone like that, but actually John Lewis, the UK retailer, is really good at this. Last year, the year before in 2014, they had a lovely cute tearjerker called Monty the Penguin, about a penguin looking for love. This year they did a Man on the Moon partnership with Aged UK and talked about the loneliness of the elderly at Christmas. In both occasions, they really got this lovely ecosystem profile. They had those 3 elements down pat. They had novelty, they had emotion, and they had relevance. But beyond that, they also had an ecosystem that spanned the online and offline world. They had apps, They had little stuffed toys of Monty the Penguin that sold out even though they were £90 each. They had a Twitter account for Monty and his girlfriend Mabel. In 2015, they had jigsaws that were available for purchase. They had Christmas cards. So they really thought through how to get long-term engagement with this campaign. And contrast that with one of their main competitors, Sainsbury's, which did this really cute commercial of using the beloved children's book character Mog the cat. And it created a lot of nostalgia, a lot of entertainment, but it ended up with the same pattern that Budweiser did, which was really just a central node where people forwarded this onto their friends, they watched it as entertainment, but it never was able to establish any link to the brand in the context of shopping at Christmas. Really what all this comes down to is the fact that relevance is what delivers authenticity. If a brand can find a genuine role as a connector within the conversation, it's no longer going to feel out of place sort of inserting a sales message into a social setting, because it's going to be providing some sort of value because of that relevance. And that leads me to the next point, which is we also need to stop thinking about influencer marketing and start targeting communities. So while an influencer is an individual that might forward something or comment, real engagement and conversation happens within communities that form in social media. And it's these communities that amplify a campaign through engagement. So when you can map a community and understand what's the tone, what are the topics of interest, who are some of the influencers within that, what are trending hashtags, and you really build up a picture of the interest of that community and what binds them together, then a brand can play an authentic role in that community. It can reply to a conversation, connect various members of that community and play an important role. And then the influencer can amplify that. You can still pay the influencer to get the scale of their followers, but when they're replying to a conversation that a brand has started authentically, it comes across as a much more natural and non-salesy way of amplifying. And that's something that I think brands need to explore a lot more. Bundaberg Rum, going back to them, did a second phase to their campaign around Australia Day. They expanded it to a lot more Aussie legends, and they tried to link into the Australia Day celebrations. And they made progress, but what they ended up with was still disconnected conversations. They had sort of spin-off approaches. So there was a large conversation around the campaign idea of legendary, but that was more driven by a sporting community. Whereas Bundaberg Rum itself had a spin-off conversation around its identity as a Queenslander, the state of Australia which it comes from and with which it's very strongly identified. But it missed a really great opportunity to link those two conversations together. And I won't go into details of that now, but if they had been able to plan ahead a little bit more, that would have been an obvious opportunity for them. So they learned that they had a very strong campaign idea around the legendary, authentic social language. They learned they had a very shareable identity as a Queenslander. They learned which communities are relevant to them that they could use to amplify their campaign in the future. But really importantly, they also learned that they need to map the category conversation, map the communities in advance so that they can resource and plan to respond to things that happen to link disparate communities. So if there's one thing that all of this boils down to, it's using insights to create authentic amplification for branded content, because that's what delivers impact in the long term. And in the engagement economy, going viral is not enough. Without relevance to create engagement, the brand's just in an echo chamber talking to itself. So it really needs to have that relevance. And that is going to enable it to amplify through getting engagement from a community of people rather than just shouting louder. You're better off having a smaller viral footprint but with stronger engagement and a real ecosystem, because that is going to impact your brand a lot more than a massive viral campaign with no engagement. And finally, target communities, not just influencers, because that's going to allow a brand to really authentically tap into a conversation and a network that allows it to amplify authentically. Thank you.